Welcome back, y'all, and in this lesson we are going to be continuing to develop the UI of the Motivate Me application, and more specifically we are going to be adding the author's image to the image view right here, as well as the background image view. And then before the end of the video, one other thing that I'd like to do is add a little loading indicator to the button here to indicate that we're still loading a new view, or sorry, a new quote. So to get started, let's go ahead and jump into the view controller class here. And what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go ahead and paste in a little code snippet that you might recognize. We've used something that looked very similar to this before to load images. This is a really common little snippet of code that has to be used almost any time that you want to load an image into a image view. So one thing that I want to do, instead of just showing the I guess the sort of boilerplate code way of doing this over and over again the long way, what we're going to do is we're going to do this a little bit more dry, and we're going to do something that I really like to do, which is add an extension to the UI image view class that we can use to load images from URLs. So let me show you what that looks like. Let's go ahead and create a new file here, and we're going to call it UI image view because this is going to be an extension of the UI image view. We're going to need to import the UI kit framework, and we're going to create an extension and call it UI image view. And one thing that I want to do is create a function, and we're going to say load image from URL string, and that's going to be of type string. And I'm going to paste this little code snippet that we've used before into here. And what we're going to do is we are going to pass in the URL string that we're going to get from this function into this little parameter right here. So I'm going to say URL string. And then we're going to say let image equal UI image. And we're going to pass in the data object that we are optionally unwrapping right here. And then on the main thread, this is something that we just saw in the last video. Again, when we load this image from that from this URL right here, we're going to be doing that on a background thread. So we need to go back to the main thread here. So now we're going to say self.image equals the image that we optionally unwrapped right here. So this is another one of those really convenient extensions that you're going to want to use in pretty much every application that you want to use, because you're not going to want to keep writing this code over and over again. And this is what extensions are for, is to just keep things really simple, keep things really easy to use. And let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like in our code. Now this makes things super duper easy, because all we have to do is, instead of writing all that code, we could just say author image view dot load image from quote dot author image URL. This is actually going to say that this is optional, that the author image URL is optional because the quote is optional. So one thing we can do real quick to this extension function is we can say that the URL string is optional, and therefore we'll just add one more little check here. So we can say if let URL string equal URL string. And then that makes sure that that's also unwrapped. That way we can pass in an optional string and it'll just take care of it easily. So that just makes it super easy to load an image from a URL. Again, just use this code in all of your projects. Don't make things complicated. This is something that I copy from all my projects as well. It just makes things super convenient. You don't need to keep worrying about all that code, and you don't want to worry about it every time that you want to load an image. You just want to call some simple little function. The fact that this isn't built into the UI image view class is kind of frustrating, because this is just something that everybody does. So anyways, that's a little convenient freebie there. You can use that whenever you want. And then we also need to load the background image view. So we can say background image view dot load image from quote dot background image URL. And if we go ahead and run this application, that should also start to work. So we can see here that the author image is loading, as well as the background image. But it looks like our UI is a little bit off. Our text color needs to be white, not black. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And it also looks like the font size is a little too big. So let's scale the font back. Well, first let's set it to white, and then let's scale the font back to, let's do 15 font size. And we're going to go set the author to white as well. And things should start to be taking better shape now. Cool. Starting to look pretty good. This is starting to look a lot like what we have here. One thing, though, is it looks like I made this bold for the author. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And actually, I think it looks like it's more like 16 font. So let's go ahead and set that to 16. And things should really start to be looking like that design. So we're looking good. One thing that we can see here, though, is that this white text is looking a little bit hard to see on a light background like this. And the way that we fix this in this design is by adding a gradient to the back of the, or we actually added a gradient on top of the image view. So that makes it a little bit easier to read the text. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. This is another one of those little components that we're going to want to use in a lot of our different applications. And again, me going through this course with you is to give you a bunch of code that you can use in your future projects. That's the whole idea here. You're not always going to be able to memorize everything, but having a repository of code that you can use in your future projects is really valuable. So we're going to now create that component for a gradient view, and this is something that you can use whenever you want. So let's go ahead and create a group here. I'm going to call it components. I'm going to drop that right below the extensions folder, and we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it gradient view. Whoops. Make sure you click the Swift file first, and then we're going to call that a gradient view. Okay. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the UI kit framework, and I'm going to go ahead and paste a little bit of code in here. Feel free to pause the video right here and copy this code, or you can listen to me a little bit while I talk about what's going on. So again, we've got some IB inspectable properties. So if we add a gradient view to the storyboard, we are now going to have access to the first color property and the second color property. And you saw before that we had a getter and a setter inside of the inside of those IB inspectable properties. Now, instead of a getter and a setter, we have a did set. And that's because since this is our own custom class, we don't have to just use computed properties. When you extend a class, I've talked about this before, you can't actually add new properties that are going to be stored in memory to that extension. You can only add computed properties. And a computed property is just something that whenever you set the value, you run some logic or you set some other property that already exists on the class. And then whenever you get it, you're pulling it from some place that already exists inside of that class. But in this case, we're going to create a subclass of UI view called gradient view. And whenever you create a subclass, you can add whatever properties you want, and they don't have to be computed properties. They can be regular properties that just have values. But the only thing that we need to do is whenever you create an IB inspectable of a non-computed property, just a property that we can store values in, instead we want to use a did set. And a did set basically is just a little piece of code that can be run every time that this property gets set, as the name would imply. So anytime that we set the first color property, whether that's in the storyboard or if that's in code, this did set little piece is going to get run, and it's going to call the update view function. So again, if we set the first color, it's going to update the view, and it's going to run this stuff. So it's going to say we're going to get the layer from this particular UI view, and we're going to cast it to a CA gradient layer, which it definitely will be. And it's not super important that you understand this part right now. Again, this is just some boilerplate code that we can use, but we're getting the layer and we're making sure that we cast it to a gradient layer. We're setting the two colors on that layer. We're setting the start point and the end point, and we're going to draw. That's basically all that's going on here. And that's going to get called anytime that we update the first color or the second color. So this is just a really basic subview of a UI view and something that you can add to any project that you want. You can even make it a little bit more complicated if you wanted to do different things. This is just a basic vertical gradient view, but if we added some more logic to it, we could potentially do even more with it. But again, that's not the point of this. The point of this is just to get a basic gradient on screen. So let's go back to the main storyboard. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a UI view on top of this background view right here, but behind the UI view that has all of the author and quote information on it. So now that we've added that, let's go ahead and pin it to all the edges of the parent view so you can see it expanded right on top of that image view. And then we're going to want to set the background color to the clear color. And then we're going to go to the inspector over here, and we're going to change the class to gradient view. And we're going to set those first and second colors. So the first color, we're going to set a custom color, and we're going to make it black with an opacity of 70%. Or sorry, we're going to make, we're going to make it 70%. No, we'll make it 50%. Yeah. And then we are going to make the bottom, the second color, 70%. I was going the wrong way at first. So yeah, we'll make the top 50% and we'll make the bottom 70%. So it goes dark to light as it goes up. And then now if we run this, it's definitely going to make that text a lot easier to read. So now that we've got that gradient there, and you can play with this a little bit if you want. You can really pick whatever color you want. I just like that grayscale factor there, so this makes it easy to see. So now the next thing we need to do is when we click this next quote button, we're going to want to load another quote. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go into the view controller class, and on next question button tap, we're going to want to call get quote. That was easy. But this doesn't exactly tell us that it's loading, and it's not going to look very responsive to the user. So when I click the next quote button, there's a little bit of a delay before it loads the next quote. But we can definitely see the application starting to come together. And what you'll notice right there is I just clicked the next quote button, and it didn't look like anything changed. That's because it's a random quote, and sometimes you'll get the same quote. So if that happens, just click it again, and then you'll get another quote, hopefully. Cool. So now that we have that, what we want to do is add that little loading indicator. So let's go to this up here, and let's add this activity indicator view. We're going to add it down here. We're going to pin it 20 pixels from the right. And then what we want to do is click on the activity indicator, hold the control key, and let go on top of the next quote button. And then what we're going to do is center that vertically. And that's going to put that activity indicator right in the middle there, so it looks real nice and slick. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make the color of this activity indicator white, and we're going to click this animating thing, the animating property here, so that it's always animating. But what we are going to want to do is make sure that it's hidden when the application first loads. So make sure that you click that hidden property right there. Now going back into the, actually, let's open up the assistant editor real quick. And let's go ahead and create an IB outlet for this activity indicator view so we can hide it and show it as necessary. So remember, we're going to, whoops, that is not what I meant to do. Yeah, control, drag, and we're going to say loading indicator. There we go. And let's open up that view controller class here. And whenever we start to get the quote, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say loading indicator dot is hidden equals false. So it's going to show up while that's going. And then once I'm done displaying the quote, I'm going to say loading indicator dot is hidden equals true. So that way it hides it. Now if we run the application, we will see that loading indicator as the quote is loading, and it'll go away once the quote is done. So now I've got this really clean, slick looking UI. One last thing we're going to do before we wrap up this video and head into the next one is let's create an IB outlet for the button. Let's control drag into the class here. And let's say next quote button. And now that we have an IB outlet for this, anytime that the loading indicator has started and it's showing, one thing that we don't want to let the user do is like click it twice and make two unnecessary requests. So let's say next quote button dot is enabled equals false while you're getting the quote. And then after the quote is done loading, we can say next quote button dot is enabled equals true. and this will make it so that we're not firing off multiple requests unnecessary. While it's loading, you're not going to be able to just click the button again. And so we can see that working now. So we're making a lot of progress here. We're starting to see this app come together. And the next video is that little bonus thing that we're going to talk about, which is sending yourself local push notifications. So that's going to be really cool. Really excited to see that. And I will see you in the next video.